Hello and welcome to Quilt Addicts Anonymous in our Intro to Free Motion Quilting series. Today is our second video using straight line quilting, and today we're going to learn how to outline half square triangles. We're going to use this as the foundation for the next two videos that are coming next, and in those we're going to show how you can use straight line quilting to create additional texture within your half square triangles. So we're going to use this for the next two. Make sure you get it down while we're going on here. Now, in a normal quilt block, you're going to have an actual piece quilt block that you're going to be creating. But so that way we're not distracted by the fabric or seams or things that might not be quite right. We're going to draw out our half square triangle on this and our subsequent blocks. So we're going to do this for this lesson and the next two. So just assume that this was step one when we start off on the next two lessons. Now, if you're working on the long arm, you can just measure it out because you've already pieced your quilt top. But if you're working on your domestic sewing machine, you're going to want to make sure that you mark where your seam allowances are, so that way you can think about that when you are making your way around. All right, so this block finishes at 10 inches, which means we have 1/4 inch seam allowances on all sides. So I'm going to start by lining up my large ruler so that 5 1/4 inches is even with the side. And then I'm going to take my pen, and this is my Frixion Gel pen, and I'm just going to mark that out. This is one of the lines that we're going to stitch on to create our half square triangles that we're outlining. All right, now I'm going to turn the ruler again, and I'm going to put it so that 5 1/4 is now on the bottom, and this is going to sort of create our 4-patch unit that we're going to have some half square triangles in between. All right, so now we have 4 equal units. Now for this one, I'm going to have my half square triangles bisecting in the center there. So I'm going to line up my ruler right in the corner and going right into that center. And if you want to switch to your 6 by 24 inch ruler for this, or use it for the entire step, you can do that. You can see now I've got that there. We're going to do the same thing on the bottom corner. And we're going to do the same thing, having these also go toward the center. Now in real life, your half square triangles may be going in any which direction, but the same principles are going to apply. All right, now this part here is not necessary for this block, but if you are marking for where you're going to be when we go to our next blocks, it's a good idea to mark where your seam allowances are going to be. So I'm going to mark wherever my lines cross toward the end, and I'm going to do that on all sides. All right. So now again, for this one, all we're going to do is learn how to outline our half square triangles. So we're going to do that in this one. But for all of our future videos, it's a good idea to mark, if you're doing it on the domestic sewing machine, where those edges are going to be. So this is the part that's going to get eaten up once we do the Quilt As You Go assembly. So when we start doing extra texture on the inside of this, you're not going to want to aim for this corner out here. You're going to want to aim for the inside where we made that mark. All right, let's get started on outlining. So just like before, I'm going to start by pulling that bobbin thread up to the top. If you're working on your long arm, you also want to start by outlining the entire block to give yourself some room to travel. We are going to work with slim again for this one. And remember, I'm lining it up 1/4 inch away from the line I want to stitch on. You're going to do that for any ruler you are using. All right, we're going to start just by stitching down. And I like to do half square triangles one at a time, because then I'm less likely to miss something, because it's really easy to miss a part of a half square triangle. Now you can see I'm about 1/2 inch away from the edge there. I could chance it, but remember we have that sweet spot, so I'm just going to go ahead and stop and move everything. All right, so when I'm working on the long arm, it's often easier for me to position the ruler behind. But because I'm working on a low shank machine, I can't really do that with this one because it doesn't hit. The shank is too low. So a workaround for that is to put it off to the side like this. And you might need to do, you know, some going around until you can see it. I can see pretty good from this angle to make sure I got everything going. And we're just gonna go up to the side here. And as long as you get a good angle on that, you're gonna be fine. And when I'm outlining my half square triangles, I press all my seams open. And so I'm able to just either go one time down one of them if I'm using all the same thread, or if I'm using different threads, I'll usually outline each triangle individually with thread that coordinates. But you can see how this is better than the walking foot because I can go every which way on it and not have to change the direction of my quilt. It's still everything facing the same way. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stitch along in the area that is going to be the seam allowance to get to my next part. Now, if you were doing this on the long arm, you could use your traveling stitch to do that, but this whole triangle is now outlined. We're good there. So what we're going to do is I'm going to travel down here, and we're going to use that to get to our next section. And if you're on the long arm, again, just travel in your seam line between your sashing and your block. If you're on your domestic, you can just go ahead and travel in the batting. That's fine too. Okay, so now I've reached this section. Now we're not going to turn this. We don't want to turn everything because eventually the goal is to be able to do this on a big quilt, and you can't really easily move a big quilt like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to place our slim right here, and I think it's probably easier to see on the overhead camera, as on this camera here we can't actually see the line. But my needle is on the line, actually we'll go up one. And as long as I make sure that it is nice and parallel to my line, I'm going to be good. And you kind of have to experiment with what is the best way to hold my ruler. But because there are these grippies on here, the Creative Grid slim ones are really nice for that. I'm able to just go to the side like this. And I'm putting some elbow grease, I suppose, for lack of a better term. I'm pushing down with my fingers to kind of hold that in place so I can outline that triangle. And I can see that I'm getting a little off, so I'm going to make a small adjustment. You can see it's just a small little push there. I'm not making a big one. That will result in a big mess. Anytime you get off a little, you just want to make small adjustments to get back where you want to go. All right, so our goal is to come right into the point where we started, which I've done now. Everything is looking fabulous. All right, so now I'm going to, again, on the long arm, I find it easier to work from underneath and kind of to the side. For this one, I can't go behind here, although sometimes you need to when you're working on the long arm. But we're gonna avoid that when we're working on the domestic, so that way we can use any ruler, even if we have a low shank foot. Got going a little fast there, we're gonna slow it down. And this straight line is just absolutely fabulous. I could never freehand a straight line like this on the domestic or the long arm, and even with a walking foot, I probably would not be this straight because every time I stop and move my hands, I seem to get a little off in no man's land there. All right, so again, if you are working on the long arm, you're going to travel to get to the next place. If you're working on the domestic, you can just stitch in the batting or within the seam allowance. That would be fine too. I'm not too worried about my stitch length when I'm doing this section. All right, so now we're going to back our way up. And remember, this is why we practice going up and down when we were doing the straight lines, because sometimes we have to work backwards. Just stop and readjust myself. All right, we're trying to aim for that center. I had to do a little bit of an adjustment there to hit it. We're looking good. All right, this is another instance. I cannot put this ruler behind here because of the low shank. If you have a medium or high shank, you won't have that problem. But I have a low shank, and along with most domestic sewing machines. So you can actually see pretty well in this shot. I've got it about 1/4 inch away from where my edge is, and I'm just going to start going down. Part of doing ruler work is figuring out what is the best way to position your ruler with your machine and how to hold it with your hands. Like, I'm holding this very differently than I do on the long arm because this is working a lot better for my domestic, but I hold it very differently and position it differently on the long arm, which is why I think it's good to have both those videos in this course because you can really figure it out. Now I find that my sweet spot is much smaller with my hands in this position, so I've got to move it a lot more often. All right, I think we have 2 left to do. We're going to go ahead and back it up in that matting. All right, again, we cannot put it behind. We got to put it in front for that low shank machine. So I've got my needle lined up with my line, so then I can arrange this, and I'm kind of like all jumbled up back here. So I'm gonna adjust that a little bit so I got a little bit more room to work. And my stitches are a little tiny. I gotta slow down that machine or move faster, one of the two, in order to even that out a little bit. All right, we're aiming for that center so that everything matches right there. It's looking pretty good. And keep in mind, like, if it doesn't match perfectly in your center, in most circumstances, you're going to be dealing with a really busy print and you're going to be using thread that coordinates somewhat. So if you're not perfectly matched here, or your points aren't perfectly matched to start with in like real life when you're quilting, it really isn't the end of the world because you're not really going to notice it that much. All right, so we're good. We got to just do this piece here. So again, we're going to line that up so that is 1/4 inch away, which you can see pretty well on our overhead camera. And we're just going to work our way up and back. All right, so we have used straight line quilting to outline our half square triangles. In the next 2 tutorials, we're going to not only outline our half square triangles, but we're also going to create texture inside them by creating lines that sort of mimic the triangle shape within the half square triangle. How fancy you want to get and how many lines you want to add are totally up to you, but we're going to do 1 in the next video and 3 in the video after that. And then you will have the skills you need to have some fun with your half square triangles.